Octavius, by Marcus Minucius Felix. But how unjust it is to form a judgment on things unknown and unexamined, as you do. Believe us ourselves when penitent, for we also were the same as you, and formerly, while yet blind and obtuse, thought the same things as you, to wit, that the Christians worshipped monsters, devoured infants, mingled in incestuous banquets, and we did not perceive that such fables as these were always set afloat by those gossips, and were never either inquired into nor proved, and that in so long a time no one had appeared to betray their doings, to obtain not only pardon for their crime, but also favor for its discovery. Moreover, that it was to this extent not evil, that a Christian, when accused, neither blushed nor feared, and that he only repented that he had not been one before. We, however, when we undertook to defend and protect some sacrilegious and incestuous persons, and even parricides, did not think that these Christians were to be heard at all. Sometimes even when we affected to pity them, we were more cruelly violent against them, so as to torture them when they confessed, that they might deny, to wit, that they might not perish, making use of a perverse inquisition against them, not to elicit the truth, but to compel a falsehood. And if anyone, by reason of greater weakness, overcome with suffering and conquered, should deny that he was a Christian, we showed favor to him, as if by forswearing that name he had at once atoned for all his deeds by that simple denial. Do not you acknowledge that we felt and did the same as you feel and do? When, if reason and not the instigation of a demon were to judge, they should rather have been pressed not to disavow themselves Christians, but to confess themselves guilty of incest, of abominations, of sacred rites polluted, of infants immolated. For with these and such as these stories did those same demons fill up the ears of the ignorant against us, to the horror of their execration. Nor yet was it wonderful, since the common report of men, which is always fed by the scattering of falsehoods, is wasted away when the truth is brought to light. Thus this is the business of demons, for by them false rumors are both sown and cherished. Thence arises what you say that you hear, that an ass's head is esteemed among us a divine thing. Who is such a fool as to worship this? Who is so much more foolish as to believe that it is an object of worship? Unless that you even consecrate whole asses in your stables, together with your epona, and religiously devour those same asses with Isis. Also you offer up and worship the heads of oxen and of wethers, and you dedicate gods mingled also of a goat and a man, and gods with the faces of dogs and lions. Do you not adore and feed Apis the ox with the Egyptians, and you do not condemn their sacred rites instituted in honor of serpents and crocodiles and other beasts and birds and fishes, of which if anyone were to kill one of these gods, he is even punished with death? These same Egyptians, together with very many of you, are not more afraid of Isis than they are of the pungency of onions, nor of Serapis more than they tremble at the basest noises produced by the foulness of their bodies. He also, who fables against us about our adoration of the members of the priest, tries to confer upon us what belongs really to himself. For these impudences of theirs may perhaps be sacred, among whom every sex prostrates all its members, among whom an iota of impudence is called civility, who envy the licentiousness of prostitutes, who lick middle-aged men, cling to their groins with a lustful mouth, men of evil tongues even if they remain silent, whom he rather tires of their impudence than is ashamed of. Abomination! They suffer on themselves such evil deeds as no age is so effeminate as to be able to bear, and no slavery so cruel as to be compelled to endure. These, and such as these infamous things, we are not at liberty even to hear. It is even disgraceful with any more words to defend ourselves from such charges. For you pretend that those things are done by chaste and modest persons, which we should not believe to be done at all, unless you proved that they were true concerning yourselves. For in that you attribute to our religion the worship of a criminal and his cross. You wander far from the neighborhood of the truth, in thinking either that a criminal deserved, or that an earthly being was able to be believed God. Miserable indeed is that man whose whole hope is dependent on mortal man, for all his help is put an end to with the extinction of the man. The Egyptians certainly choose out a man for themselves whom they may worship. Him alone they propitiate, him they consult about all things, to him they slaughter victims. And he who to others is a god, to himself is certainly a man, whether he will or no, for he does not deceive his own consciousness if he deceives that of others. Moreover, a false flattery disgracefully caresses princes and kings, not as great and chosen men, as is just, but as gods. Whereas honor is more truly rendered to an illustrious man, and love is more pleasantly given to a very good man. Thus they invoke their deity, they supplicate their images, they implore their genius, that is, their demon. And it is safer to swear falsely by the genius of Jupiter than by that of a king. Crosses, moreover, we neither worship nor wish for. You, indeed, who consecrate gods of wood, adore wooden crosses perhaps as parts of your gods. For your very standards, as well as your banners, and flags of your camp, what else are they but crosses glided and adorned? Your victorious trophies not only imitate the appearance of a simple cross, but also that of a man affixed to it. We assuredly see the sign of a cross naturally in the ship when it is carried along with swelling sails, when it glides forward with expanded oars, and when the military yoke is lifted up, it is the sign of a cross, and when a man adores God with a pure mind, with hands outstretched. Thus the sign of the cross either is sustained by a natural reason, or your own religion is formed with respect to it. And now, I should wish to meet him who says or believes that we are initiated by the slaughter and blood of an infant. Think you that it can be possible for so tender, so little a body to receive those fatal wounds, for anyone to shed, pour forth, and drain that new blood of a youngling and of a man scarcely come into existence? No one can believe this, except one who can dare to do it. And I see that you at one time expose your begotten children to wild beasts and to birds, at another that you crush them when strangled with a miserable kind of death. There are some women who, by drinking medical preparations, extinguish the source of the future man in their very bowels, and thus commit a parricide before they bring forth. And these things assuredly come down from the teaching of your gods. For Saturn did not expose his children, but devoured them. With reason were infants sacrificed to him by parents in some parts of Africa, caresses and kisses repressing their crying, that a weeping victim might not be sacrificed. Moreover, among the Tauri of Pontus and to the Egyptian Busiris, it was a sacred rite to immolate their guests, and for the galley to slaughter to Mercury human, or rather inhuman, sacrifices. The Roman sacrifices buried living a Greek man and a Greek woman, a Gallic man and a Gallic woman, and to this day Jupiter Latiaris is worshipped by them with murder, and what is worthy of the son of Saturn, he is gorged with the blood of an evil and criminal man. I believe that he himself taught Catiline to conspire under a compact of blood, and Bellona to steep her sacred rites with a draught of human gore, and taught men to heal epilepsy with the blood of a man, that is, with a worse disease. They also are not unlike to him who devour the wild beasts from the arena, besmeared and stained with blood, or fattened with the limbs or the entrails of men. To us, it is not lawful either to see or to hear of homicide, and so much do we shrink from human blood that we do not use the blood even of eatable animals in our food. And of the incestuous banqueting, the plotting of demons has falsely devised an enormous fable against us, to stain the glory of our modesty by the loathing excited by an outrageous infamy, that before inquiring into the truth it might turn men away from us by the terror of an abominable charge. It was thus your own Fronto acted in this respect. He did not produce testimony as one who alleged a charge, but he scattered reproaches as a rhetorician. For these things have rather originated from your own nations. Among the Persians, a promiscuous association between sons and mothers is allowed. Marriages with sisters are legitimate among the Egyptians and in Athens. Your records and your tragedies, which you both read and hear with pleasure, glory in incests. Thus also you worship incestuous gods, who have intercourse with mothers, with daughters, with sisters. With reason, therefore, is incest frequently detected among you, and is continually permitted. Miserable men, you may even, without knowing it, rush into what is unlawful, since you scatter your lusts promiscuously, since you everywhere beget children, since you frequently expose even those who are born at home to the mercy of others. It is inevitable that you must come back to your own children and stray to your own offspring. Thus you continue the story of incest, even although you have no consciousness of your crime. But we maintain our modesty not in appearance, but in our heart. We gladly abide by the bond of a single marriage. In the desire of procreating, we know either one wife or none at all. We practice sharing in banquets, which are not only modest but also sober, for we do not indulge in entertainments, nor prolong our feasts with wine, but we temper our joyousness with gravity, with chaste discourse, and with body even more chaste, various of us unviolated, enjoy rather than make a boast of a perpetual virginity of a body. So far, in fact, are they from indulging in incestuous desire, that with some even the idea of a modest intercourse of the sexes causes a blush. Neither do we at once stand on the level of the lowest of the people if we refuse your honors and purple robes, and we are not fastidious if we all have a discernment of one good, but are assembled together with the same quietness with which we live as individuals, and we are not garrulous in corners, although you either blush or are afraid to hear us in public. And that day by day the number of us is increased, is not a ground for a charge of error, but is a testimony which claims praise. For in a fair mode of life, our actual number both continues and abides undiminished, and strangers increase it. Thus, in short, we do not distinguish our people by some small bodily mark, as you suppose, but easily enough by the sign of innocence and modesty. Thus, we love one another to your regret with a mutual love, because we do not know how to hate. Thus, we call one another to your envy, brethren, as being men born of one God and parent, and companions in faith, and as fellow heirs in hope. You, however, do not recognize one another, and you are cruel in your mutual hatreds. Nor do you acknowledge one another as brethren, unless indeed for the purpose of fratricide. But do you think that we conceal what we worship if we have not temples and altars? And yet what image of God shall I make, since, if you think rightly, man himself is the image of God? What temple shall I build to him, when this whole world fashioned by his work cannot receive him? And when I, a man, dwell far and wide, shall I shut up the might of so great majesty within one little building? Were it not better that he should be dedicated in our mind, consecrated in our inmost heart? Shall I offer victims and sacrifices to the Lord, such as he has produced for my use, that I should throw back to him his own gift? It is ungrateful when the victim fit for sacrifice is a good disposition, and a pure mind, and a sincere judgment. Therefore he who cultivates innocence supplicates God. He who cultivates justice makes offerings to God. He who abstains from fraudulent practices propitiates God. He who snatches man from danger slaughters the most acceptable victim. These are our sacrifices, these are our rites of God's worship. Thus, among us, he who is most just is he who is most religious, but certainly the God whom we worship we neither show nor see. Verily, for this reason we believe him to be God, that we can be conscious of him, but cannot see him. For in his works, and in all the movements of the world, we behold his power ever present when he thunders, lightens, darts his bolts, or when he makes all bright again. Nor should you wonder if you do not see God. By the wind and by the blasts of the storm, all things are driven on and shaken, are agitated, and yet neither wind nor tempest comes under our eyesight. Thus we cannot look upon the sun, which is the cause of seeing to all creatures. The pupil of the eye is withdrawn from his rays, the gaze of the beholder is dimmed, and if you look too long, all power of sight is extinguished. What? Can you sustain the architect of the sun himself, the very source of light, when you turn yourself away from his lightnings and hide yourself from his thunderbolts? Do you wish to see God with your carnal eyes, when you are neither able to behold nor to grasp your own soul itself, by which you are enlivened and speak? But moreover, it is said that God is ignorant of man's doings, and being established in heaven, he can neither survey all nor know individuals. You err, O man, and are deceived, for from where is God afar off, when all things heavenly and earthly, and which are beyond this province of the universe, are known to God, are full of God? Everywhere he is not only very near to us, but he is infused into us. Therefore once more look upon the sun. It is fixed fast in the heaven, yet it is diffused over all lands equally, present everywhere. It is associated and mingled with all things. Its brightness is never violated. How much more God, who has made all things and looks upon all things, from whom there can be nothing secret, is present in the darkness, is present in our thoughts, as if in the deep darkness. Not only do we act in him, but also, I had almost said, we live with him. Neither let us flatter ourselves concerning our multitude. We seem many to ourselves, but to God we are very few. We distinguish peoples and nations. To God, this whole world is one family. Kings only know all the matters of their kingdom by the ministrations of their servants. God has no need of information. We not only live in his eyes, but also in his bosom. But it is objected that it availed the Jews nothing that they themselves worshipped the one God with altars and temples, with the greatest superstition. You are guilty of ignorance if you are recalling later events while you are forgetful or unconscious of former ones. For they themselves also, as long as they worshipped our God, and he is the same God of all, with chastity, innocence and religion, as long as they obeyed his wholesome precepts, from a few became innumerable, from poor became rich, from being servants became kings, a few overwhelmed many, unarmed men overwhelmed armed ones, as they fled from them, following them up by God's command, and with the elements striving on their behalf. Carefully read over their scriptures, or if you are better pleased with the Roman writings, inquire concerning the Jews in the books, to say nothing of ancient documents, of Flavius Josephus or Antoninus Julianus. And you shall know that by their wickedness they deserved this fortune, and that nothing happened which had not before been predicted to them, if they should persevere in their obstinacy. Therefore you will understand that they forsook before they were forsaken, and that they were not, as you impiously say, taken captive with their God, but they were given up by God as deserters from his discipline. Further, in respect of the burning up of the world, it is a vulgar error not to believe either that fire will fall upon it in an unforeseen way, or that the world will be destroyed by it. For who of wise men doubts, who is ignorant, that all things which have had a beginning perish, all things which are made come to an end? The heaven also, with all things which are contained in heaven, will cease even as it began. The nourishment of the seas by the sweet waters of the springs shall pass away into the power of fire. The Stoics have a constant belief that, the moisture being dried up, all this world will take fire. And the Epicureans have the very same opinion concerning the conflagration of the elements and the destruction of the world. Plato speaks, saying that parts of the world are now inundated and are now burnt up by alternate changes. And although he says that the world itself is constructed perpetual and indissoluble, yet he adds that to God himself, the only artificer, it is both dissoluble and mortal. Thus it is no wonder if that mass be destroyed by him by whom it was reared. You observe that philosophers dispute of the same things that we are saying, not that we are following up their tracks, but that they, from the divine announcements of the prophets, imitated the shadow of the corrupted truth. Thus also the most illustrious of the wise men, Pythagoras first and Plato chiefly, have delivered the doctrine of resurrection with a corrupt and divided faith. For they will have it, that the bodies being dissolved, the souls alone both abide forever, and very often pass into other new bodies. To these things they add also this, by way of misrepresenting the truth, that the souls of men return into cattle, birds, and beasts. Assuredly, such an opinion as that is not worthy of a philosopher's inquiry, but of the ribaldry of a buffoon. But for our argument it is sufficient, that even in this your wise men do in some measure harmonize with us. But who is so foolish or so brutish as to dare to deny that man, as he could first of all be formed by God, so can again be reformed, that he is nothing after death, and that he was nothing before he began to exist? And as from nothing it was possible for him to be born, so from nothing it may be possible for him to be restored. Moreover, it is more difficult to begin that which is not than to repeat that which has been. Do you think that, if anything is withdrawn from our feeble eyes, it perishes to God? Every body, whether it is dried up into dust, or is dissolved into moisture, or is compressed into ashes, or is attenuated into smoke, is withdrawn from us, but it is reserved for God in the custody of the elements. Nor, as you believe, do we fear any loss from sepulture, but we adopt the ancient and better custom of burying in the earth. See therefore how for our consolation all nature suggests a future resurrection. The sun sinks down and arises, the stars pass away and return, the flowers die and revive again. After their wintry decay, the shrubs resume their leaves, seeds do not flourish again, unless they are rotted. Thus the body in the sepulchre is like the trees, which in winter hide their verdure with a deceptive dryness. Why are you in haste for it to revive and return, while the winter is still raw? We must wait also for the springtime of the body. And I am not ignorant that many, in the consciousness of what they deserve, rather desire than believe that they shall be nothing after death. For they would prefer to be altogether extinguished rather than to be restored for the purpose of punishment, and their error also is enhanced, both by the liberty granted them in this life and by God's very great patience, whose judgment, the more tardy it is so much the more just. And yet men are admonished in the books and poems of the most learned poets of that fiery river, and of the heat flowing in manifold turns from the Stygian marsh, things which, prepared for eternal torments, and known to them by the information of demons and from the oracles of their prophets, they have delivered to us. And therefore among them also even King Jupiter himself swears religiously by the parching banks and the black abyss, for with foreknowledge of the punishment destined to him with his worshippers, he shudders. Nor is there either measure or termination to these torments. There the intelligent fire burns the limbs and restores them, feeds on them and nourishes them, as the fires of the thunderbolts strike upon the bodies and do not consume them, as the fires of Mount Etna and of Mount Vesuvius and of burning lands everywhere glow, but are not wasted, so that penal fire is not fed by the waste of those who burn, but is nourished by the unexhausted eating away of their bodies. But that they who know not God are deservedly tormented as impious, as unrighteous persons, no one except a profane man hesitates to believe, since it is not less wicked to be ignorant of than to offend the parent of all and the Lord of all. And although ignorance of God is sufficient for punishment, even as knowledge of him is of avail for pardon, yet if we Christians be compared with you, although in some things our discipline is inferior, yet we shall be found much better than you. For you forbid and yet commit adulteries. We are born men only for our own wives. You punish crimes when committed. With us, even to think of crimes is to sin. You are afraid of those who are aware of what you do. We are even afraid of our own conscience alone, without which we cannot exist. Finally, from your numbers, the prison boils over. But there is no Christian there, unless he is accused on account of his religion or a deserter. Neither let anyone either take comfort from or apologize for what happens from fate. Let what happens be of the disposition of fortune, yet the mind is free, and therefore man's doing, not his dignity, is judged. For what else is fate than what God has spoken of each one of us, who, since he can foresee our constitution, determines also the fates for us according to the deserts and the qualities of individuals. Thus, in our case, it is not the star under which we are born that is punished, but the particular nature of our disposition is blamed, and about fate enough is said. Or if, in consideration of the time, we have spoken too little, we shall argue the matter at another time more abundantly and more fully. But that many of us are called poor, this is not our disgrace, but our glory. For as our mind is relaxed by luxury, so it is strengthened by frugality. And yet who can be poor if he does not want, if he does not crave for the possessions of others, if he is rich towards God? He rather is poor, who although he has much, desires more. Yet I will speak according as I feel. No one can be so poor as he is born. Birds live without any patrimony, and day by day the cattle are fed. And yet these creatures are born for us, all of which things, if we do not lust after, we possess. Therefore, as he who treads a road is the happier the lighter he walks, so happier is he in this journey of life, who lifts himself along in poverty and does not breathe heavily under the burden of riches. And yet even if we thought wealth useful to us, we should ask it of God. Assuredly he might be able to indulge us in some measure, whose is the whole. But we would rather despise riches than possess them. We desire rather innocence. We rather entreat for patience. We prefer being good to being prodigal. And that we feel and suffer the human mischiefs of the body is not punishment, it is warfare. For fortitude is strengthened by infirmities, and calamity is very often the discipline of virtue. In addition, strength both of mind and of body grows torpid without the exercise of labor. Therefore all your mighty men whom you announce as an example have flourished illustriously by their afflictions, and thus God is neither unable to aid us, nor does he despise us, since he is both the ruler of all men and the lover of his own people. But in adversity he looks into and searches out each one. He weighs the disposition of every individual in dangers, even to death at last. He investigates the will of man, certain that to him nothing can perish. Therefore, as gold by the fires, so are we declared by critical moments. How beautiful is the spectacle to God when a Christian does battle with pain, when he is drawn up against threats and punishments and tortures, when mocking the noise of death he treads underfoot the horror of the executioner, when he raises up his liberty against kings and princes and yields to God alone, whose he is, when, triumphant and victorious, he tramples upon the very man who has pronounced sentence against him. For he has conquered who has obtained that for which he contends. What soldier would not provoke peril with greater boldness under the eyes of his general? For no one receives a reward before his trial, and yet the general does not give what he has not. He cannot preserve life, but he can make the warfare glorious. But God's soldier is neither forsaken in suffering, nor is brought to an end by death. Thus, the Christian may seem to be miserable. He cannot be really found to be so. You yourselves extol unfortunate men to the skies, Minucius Felix, for instance, who, when he had failed in his attempt against the king, would have perished among the enemies unless he had sacrificed his right hand. And how many of our people have borne that not their right hand only, but their whole body should be burned up without any cries of pain, especially when they had it in their power to be sent away. Do I compare men with Minucius or Octavius or with Regulus? Yet boys and young women among us treat with contempt crosses and tortures, wild beasts, and all the bugbears of punishments with the inspired patience of suffering. And do you not perceive, O wretched men, that there is nobody who either is willing without reason to undergo punishment or is able without God to bear tortures? Unless perhaps the fact has deceived you that those who know not God abound in riches, flourish in honors, and excel in power. Miserable men! In this respect they are lifted up the higher, that they may fall down lower. For these are fattened as victims for punishment, as sacrifices they are crowned for the slaughter. Thus, in this respect, some are lifted up to empires and dominations, that the unrestrained exercise of power might make a market of their spirit to the unbridled license that is characteristic of a ruined soul. For apart from the knowledge of God, what solid happiness can there be, since death must come? Like a dream, happiness slips away before it is grasped. Are you a king? Yet you fear as much as you are feared, and however you may be surrounded with abundant followers, yet you are alone in the presence of danger. Are you rich? But fortune is ill-trusted, and with a large traveling equipage, the brief journey of life is not furnished, but burdened. Do you boast of the fasces and the magisterial robes? It is a vain mistake of man, and an empty worship of dignity, to glitter in purple and to be sordid in mind. Are you elevated by nobility of birth? Do you praise your parents? Yet we are all born with one lot. It is only by virtue that we are distinguished. We therefore, who are estimated by our character and our modesty, reasonably abstain from evil pleasures, and from your pomps and exhibitions, the origin of which in connection with sacred things we know, and condemn their mischievous enticements. For in the chariot games who does not shudder at the madness of the people brawling among themselves, or at the teaching of murder in the gladiatorial games? In the scenic games also, the madness is not less, but the debauchery is more prolonged. For now a mimic either expounds or shows forth adulteries. Now nerveless player, while he feigns lust, suggests it. The same actor disgraces your gods by attributing to them adulteries, sighs, hatreds. The same provokes your tears with pretended sufferings, with vain gestures and expressions. Thus you demand murder, in fact, while you weep at it in fiction. But that we despise the leavings of sacrifices, and the cups out of which libations have been poured, is not a confession of fear, but an assertion of our true liberty. For although nothing which comes into existence as an inviolable gift of God is corrupted by any agency, yet we abstain, lest any should think either that we are submitting to demons to whom libation has been made, or that we are ashamed of our religion. But who is he who doubts of our indulging ourselves in spring flowers, when we gather both the rose of spring and the lily, and whatever else is of agreeable color and odor among the flowers? For these we both use scattered loose and free, and we twine our necks with them in garlands. Pardon us, forsooth, that we do not crown our heads. We are accustomed to receive the scent of a sweet flower in our nostrils, not to inhale it with the back of our head or with our hair. Nor do we crown the dead. And in this respect I the more wonder at you in the way in which you apply to a lifeless person, or to one who does not feel, a torch, or a garland to one who does not smell it, when either as blessed he does not want, or being miserable he has no pleasure in flowers. Still we adorn our obsequies with the same tranquillity with which we live, and we do not bind to us a withering garland, but we wear one living with eternal flowers from God, since we, being both moderate and secure in the liberality of our God, are animated to the hope of future felicity by the confidence of his present majesty. Thus we both rise again in blessedness, and are already living in contemplation of the future. Then let Socrates, the Athenian buffoon, see to it, confessing that he knew nothing, although boastful in the testimony of a most deceitful demon. Let Arcesilaus also, and Carneades and Pyrrho, and all the multitude of the academic philosophers, deliberate. Let Simonides also forever put off the decision of his opinion. We despise the bent brows of the philosophers, whom we know to be corrupters and adulterers and tyrants, and ever eloquent against their own vices. We who bear wisdom not in our dress, but in our mind, we do not speak great things, but we live them. We boast that we have attained what they have sought for with the utmost eagerness, and have not been able to find. Why are we ungrateful? Why do we grudge if the truth of divinity has ripened in the age of our time? Let us enjoy our benefits, and let us in rectitude moderate our judgments. Let superstition be restrained, let impiety be expiated, let true religion be preserved. When Octavius had brought his speech to a close, for some time we were struck into silence, and held our countenances fixed in attention, and as for me, I was lost in the greatness of my admiration, that he had so adorned those things which it is easier to feel than to say, both by arguments and by examples, and by authorities derived from reading, and that he had repelled the malevolent objectors with the very weapons of the philosophers with which they are armed, and had moreover shown the truth not only as easy, but also as agreeable. While therefore I was silently turning over these things in my own mind, Caecilius broke forth, "I congratulate as well my Octavius as myself, as much as possible on that tranquility in which we live, and I do not wait for the decision. Even thus we have conquered. Not unjustly do I assume to myself the victory, for even as he is my conqueror, so I am triumphant over error. Therefore, in what belongs to the substance of the question, I both confess concerning providence, and I yield to God, and I agree concerning the sincerity of the way of life which is now mine. Yet even still some things remain in my mind, not as resisting the truth, but as necessary to a perfect training, of which on the morrow, as the sun is already sloping to his setting, we shall inquire at length in a more fitting and ready manner. But for myself, said I rejoice more fully on behalf of all of us, because also Octavius has conquered for me, in that the very great invidiousness of judging is taken away from me. Nor can I acknowledge by my praises the merit of his words. The testimony both of man and of one man only is weak. He has an illustrious reward from God, inspired by whom he has pleaded, and aided by whom he has gained the victory. After these things we departed glad and cheerful, Caecilius to rejoice that he had believed, Octavius that he had succeeded, and I that the one had believed and the other had conquered,